Indirect yes no question. Question may be a direct question or indirect question. We know that when a reported speech is changed into an indirect speech, it has an indirect question if it has an indirect question. For example, if you look at 68, one evening he asked her whether he might go home with her. So we know that whether he might go home with her is an indirect question, right? So let's look at the structure. We note that the phrase one evening is fronted, right? Because it's an adjunct. So whose normal position is he might ask her one evening, or we can take it to the whether she might go with her, or whether he might go with her one evening. If we take it to the end of the sentence, we take it, but it can create ambiguity in that case, right? So he asked her one evening whether he might go home with her. We can say he asked her whether he might go home with her one evening. So one evening, if we take it to the end place, it can be ambiguous, because in that case it may be taken for the verb go. It may be taken as an adjunct of the verb go. So bringing it into the front position or after he asked her one evening would be a better choice in this case. So bracketing 69 for main clause constituent, we get the 71 sentence NP he, VP asked, and we have NP her, and one evening is an adjunct. So he subject, we know her is an indirect object, one evening is a prepositional phrase, it is an adjunct, and S bar sentence, the embedded sentence is whether he might go home with her. So this is our direct object. So whether element is our direct object. So we have argued that whether, like, or if occupies the complementizer slot in S bar. We have already discussed it. So he said her, complementizer, that her, and then we can have an S bar. And he asked her, then we have S bar, complementizer, if, and then complementizer, a sentence, S bar sentence. And similarly, he asked her, S bar, complementizer, whether, or, and then we S bar sentence. Remember about these three things. In 72A, there is a possibility that we could omit that. It won't make any difference. However, we cannot omit if or whether. They are obligatory elements, complementizer, whereas that is an optional complementizer. Unlike that, the complementizers, whether and if, indicate that the subordinate clause is a question, whereas that does not tell us anything about. Whether or if cannot be deleted. Indirect question, subordinate clauses introduced by whether or if correspond to direct question of the yes no type. He asked, may I go home with you? Yes or no. He asked her whether he might go home with her. Yes or no. So that's why we say that these are indirect yes no questions. So direct yes no question undergo SAI. I mean, the auxiliary is brought to the initial position and subject moves to the second. For example, he's a teacher, so is auxiliary comes to the first place, and this sentence becomes, is he a teacher? Whereas in indirect yes no question, this does not happen. Indirect yes no question, on the other hand, are not subject to SAI. They are not subject to SAI, mean that they are not influenced by this phenomenon. Consider complementer, whether he might go home with her. So we did not say whether might he go. If SAI phenomenon would be using, then it would have been like this, that whether might he. So you don't see it. So normal subject auxiliary word order is preserved here. and presence of the complementizer, whether or if, signals that the subordinate clause is a question. So the simple in indirect question, the subject precedes the auxiliary, and if there is no auxiliary, we do not bring do with here, right? It remains as it is. So this tells us whether, and if tell us that it's a question. So that's why we said that we cannot delete these two complementizer, whereas the rest of the complementizer can be deleted.